Hello, everybody. Welcome to a rare video podcast for the UK and Irish Packers podcast. And look, there's loads of things happening this week, and I wanted to get on and chat about those. But one of those amazing things is that if you are a Green Bay Packers fan for longer than maybe 4 to 5 minutes, you'll know about Bob Harlan. And if you don't know about Bob Harlan, this is what this podcast is all about. But on Wednesday, this might be out before then or after then, I will get the chance to meet Bob Harlan's granddaughter, who in her own right is a superstar broadcaster. We see her on Sky these days on our side of the pond. Of course, the daughter of the great Kevin Harlan, who, aside from doing catchy live jingles of cats and squirrels and naked men running across the Super Bowl field, is just the voice of the NFL and something that I know you guys love listening to. But we're here to talk Bob Harlan, and here to help me is his granddaughter, Olivia Harlan Dekker, or Olivia Dekker. Olivia, thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Stephen. I'm so excited to be here because, like you said, our event Wednesday is going to be so busy and fun, but on this platform, we can really break it down. And I know Packer fans all over the world do love the Packers for their history. I think they're kind of a unique franchise. And as you mentioned, and we'll get into, but my grandfather's a huge reason that we have a team at all called the Green Bay Packers. They easily could be in a different city if it weren't for him.
That is not hyperbole, right? And there's a couple of things that you mentioned, and I'm going to jump into it straight away because anyone who listens to the podcast knows I'm a complete anorak for history, right? But the history side of it, and as you said, everybody loves history. It's what drew me into it, and it's what draws an awful lot of people on this side of the pond into it. If it wasn't for your grandfather bringing in Ron Wolf and Ron Wolf leaning into the history side of things, the history of Green Bay was seen as kind of embarrassing a little bit. I mean, there was 24 years of complete mediocrity. That's from the lips of your own grandfather, right? That just fascinates me that they, as you said, they wouldn't be in Green Bay without it. And I'm just going to put a caveat on this and say this is going to be a very schmoozy podcast, all right? I interviewed Chris Westling, the late, great Chris Westling. And I remember being very complimentary to Chris. And I got a couple of negative comments, Olivia, saying, can you be any further up Chris's backside, right? I'm glad I spent time up Chris's backside because we no longer have him. So I'm glad I let him know how I felt about him. So this is a pro Bob Harlan podcast and a pro Harlan family podcast. But I will amble on. I'm Irish. The listeners know about it, right? But you will soon get used to it. You're just going to sit here for 20 minutes listening to me ramble and you get to say a few words, I promise. But
well,
if I may...
accent in the world. So I
will
listen all day long. The Irish accent. Beat it. You can't beat it.
That's what gets me. You know what? Gilbert Brown, the gravedigger, he offered me a Super Bowl ring for this accent. So, I mean, I can trade it. It's a pity I can't take it out of my body and hand it to people and get rewards. But look, Olivia, I don't think it can be stated. And this one I want to pick your brain on because Bob Harlan is a mystery to me. And he's a mystery for a couple of different reasons. He's a mystery... and again, I will get out a question eventually, but I think this is important for the podcast to kind of add this scene setting and the sub-context, right, about why because on the face of it, Bob Harlan is a really friendly, kind-sounding older gentleman who, on the side, managed to mastermind Green Bay's future forever, right? So that just does that. It's very hard to grasp that. He's a humble man. Your dad is a humble man. I've watched countless interviews, a brilliant one between you and your dad, actually, and you mentioning that he's humble and doesn't like to be the star of the show, even though he's the voice of it. And it's just, your family is just a massive, there's a duality there, right? And to give people of what Green Bay was before your grandfather saved it, and I absolutely 1000% believe that, and hopefully by the end of the podcast people will see it, is that in their second year, Green Bay nearly went bankrupt. And there was a guy called Cornelius Murphy, Neil Murphy, who was actually a grandson of an Irish orphan that came from the famine. So you're welcome, by the way. And he saved the Packers by building a fence around Hagemeister Park and charging people to go through it. And then there was massive deluge of rainfall and they couldn't get people into the stands. And so Curly Lambeau had to turn the field over to the people of Green Bay. And that's how they're still a community-owned team, which is still absolutely bonkers. But they were hard up for cash then, and they were bailed out by the Hungry Five, and there's all of that history. And then we fast forward to Curly Lambeau, as visionary as he was. He went and got a dedicated practice facility called Rockwood Lodge. Unfortunately, he was a bit of a playboy and he was married to a Miss California and they put all these furnishings in it and it ended up basically bankrupting the team until a very suspicious but very advantageous fire burned the whole place down and they got insurance money. Now, they kicked Curly Lambeau out after that and got Vince Lombardi in. Lombardi was great. And then they were toying with the idea of putting a dome on the stadium. Your grandfather actually was the first person to, or the last person, I should say, to raise a potential dome over Lambeau Field, which is sacrilege, right? But all the way up until your grandfather, the story goes that the Packers were broke all the time. And your grandfather comes in, works for the organization long before he becomes the president and CEO. And he changes the trajectory of this team for a couple of different reasons. Number one, Olivia, as you obviously know, because it's written in your tome of family history that's on the bookshelf probably behind you, is that the accountant comes to him and says, Bob, we're broke. We don't have any money. So Bob has to do something about it. And then the stadium needs renovations, but the Packers don't have the money to pay for it. So they need to go to Brown County, which almost kills your grandfather with the stress. And he's the one who does all of these, brings in Ron Wolf. Ron Wolf brings in all of it. I cannot stress enough how all of these things are even in the DNA of Green Bay today. As a Harlan, as a grandchild of this great man, is all of this, does the gravity of that sit on your family and does it sit on you? Do you realize how big this whole thing is? And more so, Olivia, do you think that the people of Green Bay, where you were born and raised, do you think they realize it?
Well, that was a perfect encapsulation of a long history of the Green Bay Packers. So thank you so much for spelling that out so clearly. That was beautiful to listen to. You know when it really sunk in for me? As a little girl, obviously we went to all the games. We sat in the suite with my grandfather, which any other NFL team, they have their owner's suite. So that's where Jerry Jones sits, right? You can picture it's very glitzy. That's where the commissioner would sit with them when he comes to games. Not the Packers. The Packers suite was like the board, like the whole board, the executive board, and their wives and their kids, and there's a little bit of catering, but it's no great shakes. It's not that fancy, but at least it's indoors, right? So I mean that was the luxury part of the luxury suite. But as a kid growing up in the 90s, really most of that point before, in 1999, when he was told they had 3 years before they'd go broke. So this was before the renovation, and I very much remember the old Lambeau Field. And I mean, we'd sit there, and I guess it didn't dawn on me that he was the top person in charge of this whole operation. And we have all these pictures of my sisters and I in matching floral dresses and coloring with crayons and a Packer game going on right in front. I mean, it's pretty idyllic. It's an amazing childhood that I appreciate more now that I've grown up. And I mean, it's incredible. And I definitely find the synergy of me seeking that out in my life and in my profession. And so it's all just a pretty storybook for me. And then when he retired, I remember seeing a picture, and we have it framed at my parents' house, actually, on one of the fences of the row of homes that borders Lambeau Field. And, these are little homes that are 100 years old, and as anyone who's been to Green Bay and around Lambeau Field knows the blueprint of Green Bay. It's very much blue collar. This is a people's city. And the community got together to make these letters that say, "Thank you, Harlan family." And it was displayed, and I'll try to find the picture for you. That's when I was like, oh my gosh, they get it. They are appreciative. They know. And that it was not just him, but Harlan family. I was blown away by that. I get chills every time I see that photo. So that was incredible. And then he's been inducted into the Packers Hall of Fame and the Wisconsin Hall of Fame. Those are his biggest. I think he's in a couple other small ones, but those are the big ones. And I personally think he should be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and I would love to see that happen sooner than later. He is, I believe, 89 now. So yeah, it's something that I very much can appreciate, retroactively what he did to keep this team here, and little by little, and we'll get more into the Lambeau renovation, I'm sure, but of how hands-on he was with the whole thing. It's pretty unheard of. I don't believe it happens this way with any other team owner, because that's the acting role he had, but it was way more hands-on and gritty than that.
Yeah, and that's what fascinates me about the man, right? And I'd love to find out and sort of pick your brain, and if you don't mind, get a peek behind the curtain a little bit as to, is he a bit of a badass when it comes to it, right? Has he ever beaten anybody up in a restaurant for you? Because he just seems the man who takes action, right? Because I don't know why he's not talked about more, because when you ask people who are the big names in Green Bay, it's, for recent people, it's Aaron Rodgers, right? And then before that, they hit the Brett Favres. Before that, if you're really an anorak, you start hitting Bart Starr. Vince Lombardi, Curly Lambeau. I just don't know why Bob's name isn't higher on that list because, and I don't know if it's because he's a humble man. He's not a flashy guy. He doesn't look for credit. And any interview that I've ever seen with him, and I've seen a lot, he will go through all of these things that he did without any pomp and circumstance. Olivia, I take out the bins sometimes and the bag breaks and I have to clean it up. And I will make sure my wife knows that that happened, right? Because I want all the kudos I can get for cleaning something up that, because God forbid she doesn't know what I do. So for Bob Harlan to do it, because look, at the end of the day, he comes in and he's been with the organization a long time. And usually that becomes entrenched, right? And you sort of do the same thing as everybody did. One of the things that he changed massively was he went after Ron Wolf, and Ron Wolf needed control fully, and he didn't want the board meddling in that. Bob Harlan had the mettle to go to the board and say to them, no longer are you getting involved in anything to do with the football operations. And they did that during Curly Lambeau's time. And in fact, they ran Curly Lambeau out of town. So there was a long history. And the only people, or the only person, I should say, who did something like that, and it went so disastrously after that they start meddling again, was the great man Vince Lombardi. So your dad did something and took a gamble, because it seems, you look back now, Olivia, right, and you go, of course, it's Ron Wolf. And then Ron Wolf brings in Mike Holmgren, and Mike Holmgren was the hottest thing ever. And then he brings in Reggie White, and then he brings in Brett Favre, and then he brings in Ted Thompson, right? And then your dad brings in Ted Thompson underneath the nose of Mike Holmgren for Seattle, and does so when Mike Holmgren is on holiday. So he does all of these things that are against the grain, against what he's seemingly been taught, and against what seems like his outward personality. Rich Ryman, a journalist in Green Bay, on a panel about your grandfather, said that he only ever witnessed your grandfather act snippily or rude. Not even rude's probably a strong word, but once. And that's when he was campaigning for the Brown County tax to do the renovations. And someone asked him a really stupid question or was really mean to him. And he snapped a bit. And then he pulled back again. So for a man to go through that stress and only snap once, it just leads to the humbleness of him. Who is Bob Harlan? I mean, because he did all of these great things that still resonate today, kept the team in Green Bay today. That Brown County vote was, 50 to 51 to 49%. That really didn't go through. And people said they've never seen him so haggard. But who is Bob Harlan? Is he the nice guy? Is he a shrewd businessman? Is he both? What side do you see?
I'm shocked anyone has ever caught him being snippy. He is just from start to finish. And as a grandfather, as a father, I've seen him as a father-in-law, as, everything about him, every role he has as a friend, as a husband, he is gentle. He is a complete gentleman. He is class personified. He is quietly confident. It's amazing almost knowing him as this gentle person, the way he moves, the way he conducts himself. He can put a smile on absolutely anyone's face. He's kind of got this just charm, this charisma. He'll stop and look everyone in the eye and just talk their ear off, remember everyone's name. I'm sure he always answered his own phone. That was pretty unheard of at the time. Never had a computer, always faxed, even when computers were very much in the mix. He was just an old school gentleman. And I think, since my dad and I are in the industry and we do interviews like this, we kind of make up for his humility because we're so proud of him. We are so excited to tell his tale because he won't. You're so right. He did write an incredible book, and I think he felt like by putting it all on paper, that's all he had to do, and almost more for the historical significance, not for his sake. And I know that genuinely as well as I know him. So he's incredibly humble, and you're so right about those years trying to pass the tax to build the stadium, to renovate the stadium. He tells stories, my grandma tells stories too, of them sitting in a restaurant and people coming up to their table and just laying out on them, saying the most horrible things, like acting as if they're stealing money physically from their purse. And like I said, this is a town where there's no expense spared. It's blue collar. So it was a huge deal at the time, and it was a 15-year tax raise, and it was extremely minimal. And that was his whole point, was the actual amount per household was going to be negligible, truly, and not not coming from any other perspective other than facts. And he would stand outside factories when the third shift got out. So, maybe 6 a.m. when that night shift's coming out, 5 a.m., 4 a.m., and he'd stand there and shake people's hand coming off of the night shift, begging for their vote, and got horrible reactions from those guys leaving the factory after a night shift. And it just shows how desperately he wanted this for the city. He was such a proud resident of Green Bay, still lives there. And he just knew that if this team is to leave this city, it's a big problem for the city. The revenue that this generates, and with his vision could generate, if run properly and commercialized properly. That's the problem about this city. And you're so right about the presidents who preceded him. They were all like local county clerks, or like they weren't football people who were presidents before. And that was the team's handicap, is they were stuck in this old era that was not advancing. They were hamstringing themselves with kind of this good old boy philosophy. And my grandfather was the first person. Now, he didn't play football. He wasn't an ex-player or anything, but he is the first like football mind to come into the position. But if you look at what he accomplished and how he did it, he really was a businessman who started as a sports writer. I mean, his story is just like, I always think about this. How did he know how to make these moves? Because he wasn't a business background person. And like you said, probably the smartest thing he ever did was give complete control to his GM. He made 2 incredible GM hires with Ron Wolf and Ted Thompson after him. 2 GMs who went on to win Super Bowls with 2 different head coaches. So his fingerprints are all over that. I think that's what impresses me most about him, is his vision as they were getting the plans in place for the new Lambeau Field, still in the same area, still the same bowl, but to commercialize it in a way of, hey, here's a great idea, let's have a pro shop, right? Like, that was revolutionary at the time. He said, let's have a pro shop, let's have it open 365 days a year. It's 2 stories, it's massive, you can't miss it, and the revenue just from that alone does amazing things to make this a profitable business. They added restaurants, bars, the atrium. They host weddings. They host charity fundraisers. Every year I MC a charity fundraiser for cancer in that atrium. And it gives me chills that this exact type of event is what my grandfather envisioned here. That this doesn't have to just be a place where football games are played on a couple Sundays a year. This can be a 365-day operation and just be a money maker that the team needed and the city needed. So he's a complete visionary, and I don't think he gets enough chops for his business acumen.
No, I mean, dead right. And again, you mentioned a couple of points there, right? One is that he made Lambeau a business. He made it viable, and as well as that, it must have been so frustrating for him, right? Because he would have known the financial status of the team. And yet he tells this story of, they were playing Buffalo just before that vote, but the people around Green Bay who were trying to get this vote through said, look, Bob, you need to hang back and start shaking hands and doing all that stuff, get the last push, because every poll that they did, I think St. Norbert's did it for them, it was coming out 50-50. So he had literally no idea how it was going to pan out. And he went to Walmart on a little makeshift table, and he said that he'd get people coming over to him, like you said, spewing all sorts of abuse, and then other people that would just avoid him. And it was incredibly difficult to do. But he would have known that had Green Bay not got that money and did the stadium renovation to put in the Bob Harlan, plaza and everything that he envisioned, Green Bay were not going to be around Green Bay anymore. And the fact that they played games in Milwaukee, he was able to pull the games from Milwaukee and protect them with the gold package, which is genius, right? Because it stops them. Genius. Because again, I mean, Green Bay, let's face it, were very indebted to the Milwaukee people for keeping the team going because the stadium was bigger. Any big games that they had, they used to cast them down there for more audience. And of course, the NFL needed more cash. And then he brought the Hall of Fame, the Packers Hall of Fame, within the stadium itself, which again is another money maker. It's fascinating. We talked to Brent Hensel there, and I've done loads of courses, and that's a fascinating thing. And the lineage from Ron Wolf, and then he got Ted Thompson, and then of course Brian Gutekunst is a disciple of Ted Thompson. So that whole scouting lineage that your grandfather started is still there to this day. So they're still successful.
Can I interrupt you? And I'm sure you touched on this, but how about Super Bowl 60, both GMs? I mean, if you talk about front office lineage, of Elliot Wolf coming up
Yeah.
and John Schneider. And I got to interview
Yeah.
John Schneider after the Super Bowl. And I mean, he couldn't have been nicer off air before we started recording. I mean, the way he hugged me when he found out I was Bob's granddaughter, and then pulled his wife over and said, Tracy, this is Bob's granddaughter. And the reverence they had for him in that moment. And I just thought, I mean, how cool. And then in the actual interview, he references, leaving Green Bay and I mean, all of that. But we talk a lot about coaching trees. We don't talk a lot about front office trees if we want to keep it really broad. But I find that part fascinating too. So sorry to cut you off, but I just thought how relevant in this recent Super Bowl of this GM tree.
Yeah, and that's what struck me too, is that, it's always the one that got away, right? Elliot Wolf was going to be promoted to GM and we didn't, and people feel a certain way about that. Schneider was going to be looked at and they feel a different way about that. But no one sort of traces those roots back, like you say, to the great man. And you're kind of like, you're looking at disciples of Bob, where you've got one in the building already. So it's that same kind of thing. Look, I think Bob Harlan should be in the Hall of Fame. How do your family feel about it? I mean, because there's been campaigns for Jerry Kramer, Leroy Butler. You guys are probably too humble, right? And you have this insane focus on, professionalism, on kindness. And I don't know if you have it in you to have this, get Bob Harlan in the Hall of Fame kind of thing campaign. But is it a sore point for you or your dad? Or I'm sure Bob never brings it up.
No, he would never. I know as a family, we've always felt like that should, be, when you look at people who, like non-players in the Hall of Fame, it's hard to argue that he isn't right up there as far as accomplishment within a franchise and contribution to the league as a whole. The Packers are such a name brand, and for him to be able to preserve it as well as advance it, and then for Mark Murphy picking right up on that and creating Titletown around the stadium. I mean, I have such respect for Mark Murphy too, for how he's just picked up right where my grandpa left off and dreamed even bigger. And who's to say what can happen next? It's exciting to see what you can do. I think a lot of people would have thought there's not enough to work with there in that Green Bay blueprint, but have they proven people wrong. And people come from all over the world, as you're a testament to, and say, that's my bucket list. That is my bucket list American sports location. It's a mecca of American sports. Kind of like what I was saying earlier, is my grandpa always tells this story, two things. He said that when the bill passed to raise the Brown County tax, which allowed for the renovation, it was either the day before September 11th or 2 days before, and that if it had been a day or two later and people were scared and not feeling, as hopeful, maybe, I think that would have been a horrible time for that vote to have happened. He says it never would have passed, and there would be no Lambeau Field, there would be no Green Bay Packers. So all of that, and my grandpa's he's a devout Catholic, he's a man of faith, and he always just feels like, well, one, God must be a Packer fan, but two, that the fate, if you want to call it that played its hand in this whole story, it's just extremely evident with that, and to have such a national disaster happen on the heels of what was such good news in Green Bay. I mean, if the history had been reversed, it would not have happened as such. That story is fascinating. And then my grandpa also says that so many people who voted no have since written him letters, called him, approach him in public, and say, I voted no, but I'm so glad enough people had the sense to vote yes, because it's changed our city and it's preserved our city. It's not like they put in this big shiny toy in the middle of this cute little town. They made it all better. They added to the story. Of an interesting thing at how Lambeau is brick on the outside. That was my grandpa's idea. The exact shade of green, it's like this beautiful washed green kind of. That was his decision. The way I understand it, the way this story's been told to me, is certain knobs and faucets and things around Lambeau Field he selected with the renovation. And it comes to, he's just like you, mad for history and sports history, and like glorifies this older time. He's he's kind of a romantic about it, and he wanted Lambeau Field to be romantic. And I think it is when you go in there. It's not like the new Raider Stadium or Jerry World. It's not these big shiny stadiums, which have a place as well. They're amazing. This is supposed to be history. Like, you step back into 1919, and he went to these old stadiums all around, a lot of baseball stadiums too, because his past and his history is with the MLB. So he went to all these old baseball stadiums. I know Notre Dame football stadium. He looked at all these as examples and inspiration, and then put together his vision for what he wanted the new and improved Lambeau Field to look like. Of course, adding 11,000 more seats and more suites, another way to just generate revenue. So, I mean, I just commend him so much for how that process unfolded to not only be more profitable, but to give such reverence to the history of not only the team, but of the sport and American sports.
Yeah. Look, there's no doubt in my mind Bob Harlan saved the Packers, continues to save them to this day, and it's nice to know that his DNA is on the little small, design decisions in the stadium and stuff like that. That's absolutely fascinating. I don't want to pick, because look, I know this is about Bob Harlan, but I cannot have Olivia Harlan Dekker on the podcast without digging into a little bit about your dad and an awful lot about yourself, Olivia, as well, right? Because I have some interesting questions, maybe some that would sort of put you kind of like, oh, hold on, at left field about it. And one is about something that happened, I believe, on social media only yesterday, right? So I'll leave you in suspense about that one. Don't worry, I'm not going to spring out and too mad on you. But look, you're Kevin Harlan's daughter. And this is a guy who, again, look, I think this is a misconception here. Your dad was this humble guy who you said when you were doing crayons in Lambeau Field, you'd no idea he was the top guy, right? And that's very Green Bay, if you don't mind me saying as well. It's very like, everyone's kind of family and friends. I mean, the players, we've bumped into players getting milk in the shop in Green Bay when we're over. It's such a small sort of parochial place. But there's this assumption that because your grandfather was Bob Harlan, that your dad's success and your success is somehow owing to the name alone, right? Which I think is complete and utter nonsense, because you only have to listen to your father and see the talent that he has. He's an iconic voice, and he's in an industry where if they could get a Tom Brady in, which they have, they will turf other guys out to get the new shiny toy in. But your dad has sort of stood the test of time, right? And an awful lot of that, and I think this is what I see an awful lot of in your material too, is just this insane work ethic and preparation. Now, I told people at the top this is going to be schmoozy, so we're going to plow on, right? But your dad, and you remarked in one of the sort of, I believe it might have been the NFL films about your family, or it was about your interview with your dad. You talk about how he handwrites his own preparation and stuff like that, right? Yes. I mean, does your dad still have the sort of drive that he has from when he was a kid? Because you say sort of like, you asked him a question when he got in and was doing sort of the NBA stuff. Was that his ceiling, did he think, at the time? And he always sort of shoots for the stars. And it's hard to sort of think about Kevin Harlan being any higher than what he is now. And it's his longevity in the industry now. I mean, as his daughter, how would you sum up Kevin Harlan? Not in one word, that's cruel. But how would you sum up his career, and how do you see him as a daughter, especially with being exposed to the industry as you are and seeing how cutthroat it is and how paranoid it can be and how replaceable people seem to be? And we saw the Washington Post people, an awful lot of those got let go. I mean, journalism is certainly not an easy thing to be in. So how do you see your dad through all of these years, through all those lenses?
I think now I'm in the business a little over a decade myself. I think I didn't realize how rare it was for him to conduct himself, like my grandfather, with such class and kindness, which is so sad to say. I wish I could tell you otherwise. I really do. I wish I could tell you, no, everyone's great. Everyone, works that hard. Everyone puts themselves below the team. It's team first. No, it's not. Almost, I get more disillusioned the longer I'm in it. No, people are not always kind, and people are very much about themselves. I have such respect for my dad that he's done it this long, and like you said, entered the business with a last name people knew, and still was just the hardest worker in the building. And he always would say, like, someone will always be smarter than you, better, more attractive than you, better at funnier, whatever it is. But the one thing you can actually quantify is no one working harder than you. So he said, check that off your list so you always know that's covered. And I respect him so much. The story you said about handwriting his own notes, it's his boards like that say offense on one side, defense. It's like a flip card. And I've never seen another play-by-play man not have theirs either made electronically, especially now in the world of AI, but or hire a third-party service that does them. They do them like that. You pay them. It's easy. I would do it that way if I were a play-by-play guy. I've got to be honest. I don't know why he does it. He hand writes them. It's a painstaking process, and he has 2 NFL games every week, and he watches tape on every team, and then he watches his tape back and writes handwritten in like a leather-bound notebook, he's from the 1700s, and critiques his own performance after every game. So at his age, and he's upper 60s now, he still watches every tape back, and I can't imagine how he has the time to do so. He's just so funny like that. He's like my grandpa. He's old-fashioned almost to a fault, and he's very romantic about the business. Like every day before his broadcast on Sunday, he listens. He has it saved on his phone on a voice note, which again, I'm sure YouTube would be easier and better, but he's got it saved on a voice note. And I need to find out exactly who it is, but it's like from the 1940s, like a Kentucky Derby or something. It's an old horse race announcer that he listens to because he loves the announcer so much. And he says that puts him in the right headspace for his cadence and his pacing and his rhythm. And he always talks about like staying in between the lines. And even when he gets really excited, he tries to keep his voice in between these lines. Like he's very nostalgic about the craft of broadcasting. So and that's why he really loves radio. He does Monday Night Radio. He does the Super Bowl on radio, and he loves radio because he thinks there's still such an art to it. And he says that'll be the last thing he'll do. I think he'll do his last Super Bowl 100, and then they'll put him in the ground. That's how it's going to go down. And he's just he's just like his dad. He really is just like his dad. And I think if you were to tell him that'd be the highest compliment he could receive, because I think he's always tried to emulate how his dad goes about his business. And just you can't find someone to say a negative thing about either one of them.
Yeah, I mean, there's fascinating back and forth between you and him on, I think it's your podcast on YouTube, where you're sort of interviewing him, and you're both retelling stories about how support staff have said how nice you guys are. Because look, I was on live radio for 10 years. I understand the stress of it, and when something doesn't go right, a guest falls off and you've got to fill time, everything that you say is amplified, right? Because any filler word that you have, and your dad goes into that a lot about the delivery, so it certainly seems like an art form to him. So I would absolutely understand if there was several dozen stories out there about people in that environment that would snap, right? I mean, I'm a parent, and there's times where, you'd sort of, don't do that. And you'd say something, you're like, well, they're tiny people. I probably shouldn't be, so harsh or whatever. And it's not a big deal. So it's amazing to see that his reputation is still out there. And just like what you say, when you go into an art gallery, you can look at something and it might just seem like paint on a canvas. But when you are able to see behind that, and you see that someone had taken 6 months of studying all the abstract artists to come to that point, it makes the art itself an awful lot more rich. So when you just listen to your dad on surface level, it's a soothing, it's a great delivery, it's polished. But when you see him cry on NFL films talking about carrying on the legacy of his dad, you realize this is not just football announcing to him. This is him preserving the legacy, which brings me to you, Olivia, because one of the great things I heard you say is that on the face of it, and I've done this, you talk to sports people, and sometimes the response that you get back is not all that interesting, let's face it. You might say to someone, you scored that awesome touchdown. I mean, let's dig into it. And they go, we made the play. And that's all they give you, right? So you're hamstrung with that. But one sentence I heard you say, and I'm paraphrasing here, is what question can I ask that will move the story forward? So you're not thinking about, this is a guy who plays football, ask him about X, Y, and Z. You're saying, what can I say to him? Because you've said this also, it's all about the viewer. So you spoke about your moment with you and your dad, and you wanted to sort of pause maybe and soak that in and get the poignancy of it all and the history. There's a first father-daughter duo to ever call a game, but you parked it because you're like, it's about serving the viewer and it's about serving the fan at the same stage. So with you as a reporter and as a broadcaster, do you carry that same weight of your grandfather and your father standing behind you and have to carry their legacy into it? And do you have this paranoia about trying to bring that storyline element to it and not just be another talking head who got an internship and just decided to do it because it seemed more fun than doing something else, you know?
That's a great question. If I feel any pressure, it's that I would hate to be the link that, ruins this whole thing, right? I would, for multiple reasons, I would hate them to say, man, Bob Harlan was such a great guy. Man, Kevin Harlan was such a great guy. Oh, that daughter, she's just horrible. I mean, that to me would just like kill me, and talk about crumbling a legacy of just being a jerk. That's not, gonna be on the cards. But as you said, there are so many like stressful moments just with live TV in general. And like I used the Super Bowl because that was my last game. That was a week ago. And just getting from A to B, like kind of around a stadium, and I'm trying, there's 2 minutes left on the clock, and I'm supposed to be in this exact tunnel where they're gonna let all the reporters go on the field. And to get down to that point was like pulling teeth, and you're dealing with a lot of people who are saying, no, you got to go around, blah, blah. And you're like, oh, the clock's ticking. I've got to go down. And here I am not watching the game because I'm trying to run down. So that's just an example off the top of my head. And I do, in moments like that, I think if I were to just be like, oh, come on, blah, 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 and just be a jerk about it, that is a perfect moment that my dad, my grandpa would never lose their cool. Yeah, I do. I think about that all the time, but it's not something I actively have to be like, okay, remember to be nice. Like
Yeah,
I
yeah.
I would hope people who work with me feel this way. But I do just feel like there's something about the way I was raised that's just kind of ingrained. And I mean that sincerely, because I got to watch these two great men, and I single them out because that's who we're talking about. But of course, their wives, my mom, my grandma, just even better if possible. I'm extremely lucky to have come from that kind of background where you know, there was no tolerance for being
Yeah.
unkind.
Yeah.
So I hope that answers part of your question. And then just from the nepotism part of it all you touched on earlier, I think what people don't realize is, despite being the third generation to work in some capacity in the NFL, we have three very different lanes. One's front office of a team, one's a play-by-play man, one's a reporter. And my dad and I being a little bit more on the same side of things with the TV and radio, but I always say, do you really think in a talent-based business where like you turn on the TV, you like them or you don't, that someone can make a call and say, hey, I've got a daughter, can you give her a job? Can you put her on air? And I always tell this story. When I went for my first job interview, I was still a senior in college, and I interviewed with the Atlanta Hawks NBA team. And we go through the whole interview, went really well. I was thinking, oh my God, this actually might happen. Okay, I'm walking out, I shake the man's hand, and I said something on my way out like, my dad was really excited for, blah, blah. And he said, oh, who's your dad? Like thinking maybe he was someone who like worked here, or should he know him? Do they go to the same country club? Like didn't know. And I said, oh, my dad's in the business too. He's a play-by-play man, Kevin Harlan. And the guy said, I had no idea. And I always remember that story because I was like, whew, I'm almost glad I said something just to like confirm to myself that that's not even why I got the interview. But I also know it wasn't, because I worked my tail off in college, and I sent out my reel to anyone who had an email. So I mean, I know how I got my jobs. I also know that timing is everything, and I've been extremely lucky with the timing of things. But also my husband plays professional basketball, and we've moved all over the country and now world, and I've had to almost reinvent my career at every turn. We moved to London. That's when I linked up with Sky Sports. We moved to Barcelona. I've been able to keep Sky Sports, which is amazing, but I've linked up with EuroLeague basketball, which is based here. So, I've had to be really flexible
Hmm.
career-wise, and nimble, and teach myself new ways to work basically. And so I'm really grateful for that part. But that kind of says that the common thread here of like the way you go about your business and the way you work extremely hard and the way you treat people, that thread definitely exists. And I've just kind of carried that with me from stop to stop.
Yeah. Look, and I was going to delve more into, I mean, you put out the message and, you get this abuse online, and I don't know whether that's a female male thing or whatever, and you put out this lovely, like you're just saying, my husband's awesome, right? Yesterday, and then you get this loads of abuse and people being sick online, and some people got the message. But yeah, look, I think you're a credit to your family, and I think you're carrying on that legacy. I'd recommend anybody watching this to go to your YouTube channel and look, because you really get a nice peek, and you see you doing your notes for the games and what you have to go through to go all the way through and stuff like that. And from me doing live radio, I definitely have a tiny glimpse of that appreciation of being on doing something live and how difficult that is, especially with a stat-based sport like the NFL. If you say one wrong thing, it's memed for forever. And like you said, if you're in an industry where there's always like 15 people behind you waiting in the wings to take your spot. I mean, I've had someone say to me on live radio before, how did you get this job? Because I want to do it now. And I'm like going, really? You have me on your podcast to try replace me? Is that how this works? So, for you to stay in the industry, yeah, amazing, right? But for you to stay in the industry and to be a valued member in the community and to keep getting these roles in different areas, you know what I mean? It's just a testament to your hard work, and I think congratulations is definitely offered there. The Harlan family seems to be in the genetics to be successful and kind, so it's nice that panned out. But Olivia, I could ask you many more questions, half because you're who you are, and then also because I'm Irish, and that's just what we do. We sit around, eat potatoes, and we talk a lot. So look,
I feel like this conversation would go much longer.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it will, yeah. Anyway, see you on Wednesday.
Yes.
Yeah. Vote down below if you want Olivia to come on every week. Olivia, there you go. That's your new assignment. I don't know if I'll be able to afford the media bills, but this has been absolutely fantastic to have you on. I appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Stephen. This is so much fun, and I appreciate you letting me, talk about my family like this. I truly don't love talking about anything more on these. I feel way more comfortable talking about my dad and my grandfather than I do my own career, and it's a pleasure to come on and be able to do that. Thank you.